This one was different from any drought in the past. It triggered a decade-long series of dust storms that became known as the Dust Bowl.
Imagine looking up at the sky and seeing nothing. Not clouds, not blue, just an endless wall of black dirt, 2 miles high, racing towards you at 50 miles per hour. Welcome to April 14th, 1935, the day America literally went dark. This is the story of how human greed turned paradise into hell, how 300 million tons of America's most fertile soil vanished in a single afternoon, and how one of the most ambitious environmental projects in history was born from absolute desperation. This is the story of the Dust Bowl. Before we dive into America's darkest environmental disaster, let me paint you a picture of what the Great Plains looked like just 100 years ago. Picture this: millions of acres of deep-rooted prairie grass stretching as far as the eye could see. Grass so thick and strong that massive bison herds could graze for millennia without destroying it. For thousands of years, this natural ecosystem was bulletproof. The deep roots, some reaching 15 feet underground, held the soil together like nature's own steel reinforcement. But then came World War I, and everything changed. High wheat prices, new tractors, the promise of easy money. Between 1914 and 1929, farmers ripped up 33 million acres of native grassland. They called it the Great Plow-Up, and it would prove to be one of the most catastrophic decisions in American history. Here's what most people don't know: the government actually encouraged this destruction. Agricultural extension agents traveled from farm to farm, literally teaching people how to destroy the very ecosystem that had protected the land for centuries. They had no idea they were creating a ticking time bomb. By 1931, nature decided to collect on humanity's debt. An unprecedented drought hit the Great Plains. We're talking biblical levels here. Annual rainfall dropped by 40%. The snowless winters meant no moisture reserves. The newly exposed soil, stripped of its protective grass, began to bake under the relentless sun. But here's the kicker: this wasn't just bad weather. Scientists now know that killing the bison herds decades earlier had eliminated nature's landscaping crew. These massive animals had shaped the prairie for millennia, creating the perfect balance of grazing and growth. Without them, the ecosystem was already weakened before the first plow ever touched the ground. And then, the wind came. April 14th, 1935, Palm Sunday. Families across Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas were enjoying a rare, beautiful morning when someone spotted it on the horizon. A wall of dust nearly 2 miles high, moving like a tsunami across the prairie. Melt White, a farmer from Kansas, later described it. It looked like the end of the world. This massive black wall, rolling and tumbling, blotting out everything behind it. People had maybe 30 minutes to prepare before their world turned completely black. Here's what it was actually like inside these storms. Visibility dropped to zero. People got lost between their house and barn, just 50 feet away. Children walked to school with wet rags over their faces. Mothers hung damp sheets over their babies' cribs, desperately trying to create breathable air pockets. The human cost was devastating. Dust pneumonia became a household term. Emergency rooms filled with people coughing up mud, literally mud, from their lungs. The Red Cross distributed thousands of dust masks, but many refused to wear them because nobody understood how deadly these storms really were. In the worst-hit areas of Oklahoma, they recorded 15 major dust storms every single month. 100 tons of topsoil per acre gone in 24 hours. By 1940, farmland that had been worth $47 per acre was selling for $33. America was literally blowing away. Between 1935 and 1940, something unprecedented happened in American history. Nearly 3.5 million people, entire communities, just left. They loaded everything they owned into beat-up trucks and headed west, mostly to California, in search of any work they could find. These weren't just statistics. These were teachers, shopkeepers, third-generation farmers, the backbone of rural America, reduced to living in shanty towns, working for pennies, facing discrimination from locals who called them Okies, regardless of which state they actually came from. The ripple effects were staggering. 750,000 farms shut down. Entire towns became ghost towns overnight. Main streets that had bustled for decades suddenly had tumbleweeds literally rolling down them. This wasn't just an environmental disaster, it was a complete social and economic collapse. But here's where this story takes an incredible turn. In 1935, while dust was still choking America's heartland, the federal government launched what would become one of the most ambitious environmental projects in human history, the Great Plains Shelter Belt Project. The plan was audacious: plant a continuous belt of trees 100 miles wide, stretching 1,150 miles from Canada to Texas. Create a living wall of windbreaks to literally stop the wind in its tracks. It was like trying to build the Great Wall of China, but with trees. Here's what went on behind closed doors. Government bureaucrats were panicking. Internal memos from the Department of Agriculture reveal officials describing the situation as a threat to national security. They genuinely feared that America's agricultural heartland was becoming uninhabitable. This wasn't just about farming, this was about whether the United States could feed itself. The execution was military in scale. The Civilian Conservation Corps deployed hundreds of thousands of workers, young men desperate for jobs during the Great Depression. They planted 6.5 million trees in just the first year. Black locust, green ash, cottonwood, species specifically chosen for their ability to survive in harsh conditions. The spacing was calculated down to the foot, tree belts every half mile to 3/4 of a mile, creating overlapping zones of wind protection. Scientists had determined that properly placed windbreaks could reduce wind speeds by up to 50% for distances of up to 10 times the height of the trees. And then it worked. By 1938, just 3 years after the first trees went in the ground, soil erosion had dropped by 65%. Wind speeds were down 25 to 50% across millions of acres. The dust storms that had terrorized America were becoming a memory. By 1942, over 220 million trees had been planted, creating 18,500 square miles of windbreaks, an area larger than Switzerland. Farmers who had fled their land began returning. Ghost towns started showing signs of life again. But here's the part of the story nobody talks about. Maintaining 220 million trees across thousands of miles turned out to be nearly impossible. By the mid-1940s, with World War II demanding America's attention and resources, maintenance dropped dramatically. And then the unintended consequences began. Eastern red cedar, one of the planted species, became aggressively invasive. Without the natural prairie fires that had kept it in check, these trees began taking over native grasslands. Some of the very areas the project was meant to protect were being overrun by the trees meant to save them. Meanwhile, farming was evolving. Center pivot irrigation systems required circular fields, but the windbreaks ran in straight lines. Many farmers began removing the trees that were now getting in the way of modern agriculture. The green wall that had saved America was slowly being dismantled by the very people it had protected. Fast forward to today, and the fight isn't over. Climate change is making droughts more severe. Modern industrial agriculture is putting new pressures on the soil, and scientists warn that without constant vigilance, we could face another dust bowl. But we've learned from history. Today's farmers use cover crops, plants grown specifically to protect soil during off-seasons. Rotational grazing prevents the overgrazing that contributed to the original disaster. Modern windbreaks are designed with native species and natural fire cycles in mind. The numbers are encouraging. Cover crop usage doubled between 2012 and 2017, reaching 15 million acres. The Natural Resources Conservation Service works with thousands of farmers annually to maintain and expand windbreak systems. The lessons of the 1930s are finally being applied on a massive scale. The impact of America's Dust Bowl experience rippled around the world. China's Great Green Wall project, designed to stop the expansion of the Gobi Desert, was directly inspired by the Great Plains Shelter Belt. Africa's Great Green Wall, attempting to halt the Sahara's southward expansion, uses similar techniques. Today's public reaction to the Dust Bowl story is fascinating. Social media is full of climate activists sharing dramatic photos of the 1930 storms as warnings about environmental destruction. Farmers' grandchildren are posting TikToks about sustainable agriculture techniques their grandparents never knew existed. Environmental groups have adopted the Dust Bowl as a cautionary tale about climate change, while agricultural advocates use it to promote modern conservation techniques. The story has become a rallying cry for both sides of America's environmental debates. Perhaps most importantly, the Dust Bowl has become mandatory curriculum in schools across America. Children learn about it alongside other pivotal moments in American history, ensuring that the lessons of the 1930s are never forgotten. Today, if you drive across the Great Plains, you'll see the legacy of America's greatest environmental disaster and its most ambitious response. Mature windbreaks stretch to the horizon, their roots holding soil that once filled the skies. Over Washington, D.C. fields of cover crops wave in winds that no longer carry away America's most precious resource. The Dust Bowl taught America that we ignore nature's laws at our peril, but it also proved that when faced with an existential threat, we can mobilize on an unprecedented scale and literally change the landscape of a continent. The question is, what environmental challenges are we creating today that our grandchildren will have to solve tomorrow? Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and check out our other videos on environmental disasters that changed history. And remember, the best way to honor the farmers who lived through the Dust Bowl is to make sure it never happens again.